My name's John Barry. I'm with Design West Michigan, so I want to welcome you all here, and thank you for coming out. And I'm very curious, how was the food? It's a new caterer. Okay, yeah, excellent. All right, good. Glad we're able to provide that. So, very glad that you're here, and very glad that Clive is here for this conversation about experiential graphic design, what it means, where it's going to go, and this whole understanding of what this profession is about. I've had the benefit of knowing Clive for many years, so I'm really pleased that he's here. And he brings significant experience in building and running global, multidisciplinary creative and business groups. Spent 15 years leading creative units for Philips Design, the design division of Royal Philips Electronics. That's in the Netherlands, that's the other Holland. During his time there, he spent 2 years in the Netherlands, 7 in Hong Kong, right? 6 in Atlanta, Georgia, leading the new business development and design research activities of Philips Design in the U.S. He's been a consultant to Fortune 500, works with companies such as Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble, Microsoft, GM. It's a Michigan company. Prior to becoming SED's CEO, he served as IDSA's CEO from 2009 to 2012. So it's very nice to have Clive here. We brought him in from Washington. He's thrilled to be in the snow. So please, let's welcome Clive Roux to Grand Rapids.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
And the format for the evening, I want Clive to talk a little bit about what SEG is all about. And he does have a PowerPoint that runs without any audio, correct?
Yeah, without audio.
All right. And then we'll let him explain what that's all about. Then I have a series of questions, some of which he already knows. And then as we go through that, I'm really hopeful that some of you will have more questions to ask him about this whole area. It's a professional area that is not as well known around here as I'm hoping it to be. So part of Clive's being here is for us to become aware of what are the opportunities here, what are the changes going on, and also for Clive to know more about what's going on here in West Michigan, and particularly at Kendall. All right? So Clive, give us a brief history on the evolution of SEGD.
Well, I think the starting point is that EGD, or environmental graphic design, is the intersection between communication and the built environment. And that takes many, many different forms. And so the thinking is we'll just show you a very quick PowerPoint. It should run for about 3.5, 4 minutes. And it'll just give you a kind of visual idea of what EGD is all about. And then maybe we can talk a bit more about that afterwards.
That works.
Amal, you want to give it a go? So the kind of questions that are asked here are sort of typical questions that would be asked of somebody that was doing environmental graphic design. And it's sort of looking at the way that the profession has developed. So it sort of starts with solving a problem of helping you navigate through a space. But of course, as technology has changed, that idea of navigating through a space has changed radically as well. And it's become much more a conversation about place making, right? So creating an experience in a space. And so where the profession started off in sort of exhibitions and wayfinding, it's moved into branded environments and the concept of placemaking itself through content. So you can think about theme parks or world's fairs or places where you're creating an environment that may not be permanent, for example.
This presentation was put together how long ago?
So this presentation is about 2 years old, and it was put together. The purpose was to try to explain to Europeans what environmental graphic design is. So it's a difficult field to sort of package up and present in a very easy way. And I think the reason for that is that it crosses so many different disciplines, and it interacts with so many different industries, and that's one of the challenges of EGD. So this presentation was meant to kind of simplify it down to those sort of basic fundamental questions that people would ask.
Because some of the impressions, certainly, of environmental graphic design are that it's about making signs.
Yeah, right. And certainly Signs are part of EGD, there's no doubt about that, but I think signs sometimes get sort of confused with advertising signs, billboards and things, and that's really not what EGD is about. So EGD is much more about using communication to solve a problem, and as you see here, how do I get from A to B, or where is the Coca-Cola Hall of Fame? It's much more problem solving than it is advertising based.
So the slideshow is basically out of date.
I think the slideshow is out of date compared to the changes that we made in SEGD last year, that's for sure, yeah.
What I'm referring to is they've changed the name from environmental graphics design to experiential graphic design.
Right, and that's the recognition that most of the practitioners in the EGD area now are using content and interface and interaction to create experiences, and that's much more than environmental graphics, which is more about signage and wayfinding itself.
And that's really where I want you to spend a significant amount of time, talking about what's happening with technology. It's so fully integrated into the built environment. What's that doing to the profession? What's that doing to graphic designers, industrial designers, interior architects, interior designers? There's a whole range of disciplines that sort of overlap in that field.
Right. So from let's try to sort of start it from a student level or a competence level. I think the way that people come to environmental graphic design is through the interest in communication and artifacts or objects, and the changes that are happening in technology now mean that the people that are coming into the profession have to be much more competent on interface design and coding, for example. So coding and interface are really new skills that are coming into the discipline, and that's been forced upon the profession by the changes in technology. But if you talk about technology itself, I think this is still in sort of very, very early phase of development. For example, in the last year, there were two major technology announcements made. iBeacon from Apple was made about a month ago. And basically what that is that's a technology that will allow you to communicate with an environment through a mobile phone. So if you were navigating through a store, let's say Macy's, then that technology allows the store to recognize you as a customer in their store and then to start to interact with you. So that's the kind of change that's coming to environmental graphics over the next couple of years. And that's what the experiential side is trying to address. So that's one. The other one is Corning announced a new glass called Willow Glass. You guys might be aware of that, but it's the thickness of 2 human hairs, and it's as strong as steel, but it's flexible. And so that will maybe, for the first time, allow us to wrap surfaces in the environment in a much more seamless way. Up to now, the kind of screens that we've had have been sort of fixed square screens. But with the Willow Glass, you can really wrap surfaces that are undulating, and that will start to allow you to make them interactive in a much more seamless way. So I think that's a big one that's coming. Certainly Corning believe that. They predict a $30 billion market for that in about 10 years, which put in perspective is about 5 times bigger than the iPhone market. So it's
looking
big.
at the Eames molded plywood screen makes me
It's like that.
wonder how that might be a very interesting application.
Exactly.
So are there schools teaching this relationship between graphic technology and environment, meaning physical built environment?
Yeah, there are schools that are teaching the intersection between communication and the built environment. For example, University of Cincinnati would be one. Art Center would be another one. Nick Hafermas at Art Center has been sort of pushing much more to integrate the technology into that conversation as well. So there are a number of them. FIT in New York, the Fashion Institute of Technology. Kent State have a program that looks into it as well. Let me think what else. This one I got to look up because I really want to make sure you guys hear it. La Rochelle College, Parsons have a program as well. The University of California, Davis, University of Colorado in Boulder, the University of the Arts in San Francisco, and the University of Wisconsin. So all of these schools have programs that are looking at communication and built environment, but very few of them have figured out how to do communication, built environment, and technology. That sort of experiential side is really something the schools haven't really got to yet.
Seems like there's an opportunity in there somewhere.
I think there's an opportunity for Kendall in there somewhere, yes.
What kind of people would provide that educational experience? I mean, you need someone who understands it in order to be able to teach it.
Yeah, and that's really where the issue is coming, because as I said, the conversation about communication intersecting with the built environment, those communication educators have tended to come out of the print background rather than the interactive background, and therein lies the issue. So to make this really work, you need the educators that are coming along with an interactive background, because a lot of the experiences that we talk about creating involve content and information, and using that in a fluid way on a platform. And that's very different to the past, where you said, is it about sign making? Sort of at a certain level, yes, because it's flat graphic representations. But that's all changing as we start to talk about experiences.
It would also lend me to think that as that whole experiential issue becomes more and more with technology in the built environment,
yeah,
questions of perceptual psychology and what is or isn't distracting, and which gets into the question of codes and laws, and
yeah.
Are you finding a significant relationship with that sort of direction?
There's a broader underlying problem there, I think. And the underlying problem is that in the world of signs and advertising, there's a lot going on to introduce digital technologies into the environment. So, for example, Daktronics, who are the leader in outdoor digital signage, they said that there would be another 3 million screens integrated into the environment this year. And there are a lot of people that don't like that idea, because they see it as visual clutter or visual pollution, if you like.
When you're talking about a screen, you're not talking about a 32-inch monitor.
No. You're talking about building-sized screens like Times Square or billboards out on a highway somewhere. Those.
How many million?
3 million. A lot of screens, right? But in the big scheme of things, it's going to be billions before the environment is sort of made intelligent. So it's not that much. But I think that a lot of these screens they get a kind of negative connotation because they're coming into the environment as big billboards and advertising displays. And as such, they're not solving somebody's problem. And that's kind of the key differentiator between the EGD profession and advertising, that EGD really is focused on the end user, and it's trying to solve a particular problem that somebody's got navigating the environment or experiencing the environment.
A communication problem of moving from point A to B, or how to maneuver, or how to gain information so I can make a decision to do something.
Right. So the reason I bring this up is because the business model is kind of broken between what designers can do and what the advertising industry wants to do. And so if you talk to the advertising industry, then for them, the return on investment is there's no way we could give up 30 seconds of this billboard's time to do something useful to solve someone's problem. And I kind of look at it from the other side of the coin, and I think, well, if that's the way the internet developed, there's also no way any of us would be using the internet today. So, I know that at some point there has to be a rationalization, and somebody has to look at all of the screens going into the environment and say, well, how could they be more effectively used? In other words, what problem could they address? And so I think there's a sort of change point coming in the next 5 to 10 years. But right now, we're just sort of looking at a brick wall and going, all right, how do we deal with this? It's two worlds and they're not colliding. So maybe that's where a technology provider like an Apple can really make a big difference, that they're sort of neutral, they're not the environment, they're not a credit card company, they're not an advertising company, and they have a lot of trust. So I think if they introduce a platform that allows an interaction between individuals and the environment, that might be the way that we seed this whole process.
A platform and the materials that you were talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
That could get very interesting.
Yeah.
Right, SCGD is an international professional association.
Yes.
What role do you see it playing in any of the legislative issues which could indeed get in the way of either helping or hindering a really good design solution?
Well, maybe we can talk about the last 20 years or so. And one of the big things from a sort of code or standards point of view in the last 20 years has been ADA, so the Americans for Disabilities Act, right? And the goal of that is to flatten the playing field and make it possible for anybody, disabilities or no disabilities, to be able to participate in life. And SCGD has played quite a big role in making sure that those standards or those codes are rolled out in the profession and that the profession has contributed to creating those standards. So that's been the activity of the past. There have also been some activities with ANSI, which is the American Standards Association. And basically, ANSI operates at a level just above the code level. They set a standard for how things should happen, and then those standards get rolled out into the codes themselves. So SCGD and ISA, the International Sign Association, work on the committee for signage with ANSI. And we've been trying to help them to bring design thinking into the way that they think about their standards or their codes, basically.
I hope I'm setting up this question for you to give a positive answer.
Yeah.
But are you seeing SCGD do that in a proactive way or in a reactive way?
I think it's more reactive, and simply because we don't have the kind of resources to go out and proactively start activities there, you know. But this conversation about the advertising and billboards and how we integrate that, I kind of feel we're going to have to be more proactive in that, because otherwise it's going to take too long for the integration to happen. So.
And that'd be the point.
Yeah.
Interesting. There's a mix of practicing professionals and students here. So I want to ask you the question of what kind of educational experiences would you suggest are appropriate for design students interested in knowing more about this field?
I mean, that's traditionally one of the sort of challenges of the environmental graphic design profession, that there haven't been the courses for kids to go through and come out saying, I'm an EGD designer, right? That hasn't happened. But what everybody acknowledges is that it requires at least two things as skills from designers, or as interest areas, if you like. And the first one is collaboration. So I think for a student to come out of college and be sort of prepared for the area, they need to want to work in a collaborative way, because there's so many different parties involved in creating experiences in the environment, you know. And so collaboration is absolutely one of them. I think the second one is the idea of interactivity. I mean, really they have to start to understand interface design as such. And that will really help students coming into the area. So those are two. And then I think sort of lying just under the surface of that are the traditional skills of communication, type, color, layout, form, those things. What we see very strongly is the people that really make it in the environmental graphic design or experiential graphic design area, they have a strong sort of affinity to be able to communicate something, but they also really love the idea of an artifact or an object and the idea of how things are made, you know. So those two skills together kind of make up the core of the profession.
For those who know me, I did not plant in him the concept of collaborative design.
No.
Right? No.
I can vouch for that.
But thank you.
That's a pleasure.
For saying that. So what kind of companies do this sort of work? You know, where would a designer seek to get employed? What are career paths? You know, can you say a little more about that?
Yeah. So I mean, you could go and work for Pentagram, for example, and Pentagram do a lot of this work. So there are traditional design consultancies that do it, but there's also specialist companies that sort of only do this work. And then I would Think about companies like 212 in New York, David Gibson's group, Caloria and Van den Eynden, they're in New York as well. Hunt Design in LA, they're a group that focuses purely on this, and even more on the wayfinding side than, say, the placemaking side. Gallagher Associates in Washington, D.C., they focus on exhibition design and have a sort of very heavy concentration on museums. So creating experiences within the museum environment and bringing technology in there. Infinite Scale in Salt Lake City. And I'm doing this because a student asked me a little bit earlier about where to find these companies, and they literally are across the US. They're everywhere. Traverse City, one of the originals. Corbin Design, they focus on this as well. But then also, so these are the standalone design firms that are doing EGD. But there's also a sort of interesting intersection with architecture, obviously, because it's about the built environment. So you'd find companies like SOM, Gensler. Many of those big architectural practices have an environmental graphic design division or department within them. And so you can also do it from that approach. You can come from more the architectural side. There's a number of signage companies, Daktronics, Yesco, SNA down in Texas. And a lot of those signage companies also have graphics that are sort of heading into the environmental graphic side as well. So offering more than just the signage. And that's sort of obvious because I think as most students are finding out today, you can pretty well make anything you want. And so the process of making isn't really the skill or the value that you can sell somebody. You know, that's becoming a commodity, being able to make something. And so in order to add some value to what you make, you need design. And that's where EGD starts to come into the equation. So
We have an Olympics starting this week. I'm a huge Olympics fan. But for those of you who aren't aware, sort of the Olympics and the Olympic in LA was one of the first really big understandings of the role of communication graphics, from the ability to move all those people and
yeah.
You know, Deborah, I think, did that.
Yeah, Deborah
right?
Nichols. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's pretty amazing the kind of communication activities that have to happen there. But now when you add technology and the interaction and what that means, that's just a whole nother level.
Yeah. So actually, the sort of the benchmark project in that placemaking area is a project that a designer called Lance Wyman did in 1968, the Mexico Olympics, right? And that was just, I think, it is still today an absolutely amazing project because it shows how you can take a culture and use that in an environment, an Olympic village, and create a sense of place that makes people understand where they've got to go, what's going to happen, and gives you that sort of cultural sense that you're not in maybe we can say it, you're not in Texas anymore, right? So really a fascinating project, but John mentions the 1984 Olympics, and it's very significant because that was when this idea of placemaking could be seen here in America. And I think that was quite a turning point for many people to sort of realize, it's not about signage. It's about a sense of experience and a sense of place. And so, yes, very, very important project for sure.
And placemaking is certainly a term that is used a lot, appropriately and understandingly, and it's important. So it's hard for me to imagine a place without some form of communications in it.
Yeah,
so,
right. So, and that's sort of what the slides were meant to indicate. You know, it's like, how would you know where you're going if there's no signage or wayfinding? It's fascinating that.
Does SCGD have student chapters?
Yes, so there are two at the moment. There's a student chapter at the Corcoran School of Design in Washington, D.C., and they sort of focus on exhibition design. And there's one at FIT, the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York. Then there's close collaborations with two others, which is the University of Oklahoma and the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. So the question would be, why those places, right?
Yeah, that was coming up.
I bet it was. And I think the answer to that is because there have been faculty in those four institutions that have been related to SEGD and specifically to the board. So there were board members that felt that the experiences that students are looking for, the kind of connections that students need, is not the same as a professional chapter in a city. And I think that's true. I agree with that. And so they've set up these sort of 4 student chapters where they've tried to make that possible for the students to interact with the professional association.
So you know where I'm going with this one. So if there was interest here at Kendall for a student chapter,
Yeah.
and there were students interested in doing that,
We'd love to help you
the
set it
person
up. Yeah,
to
I'd
talk
help
to?
you for sure. Yeah.
Because under this whole heading of collaboration, SEGD really got founded with the recognition that there was no professional association that sort of dealt in this interstitial space between architecture and graphics and industrial design. So it was kind of a way to bring together people who were doing that work but didn't have the professional status of what it was all about. So
Right.
it just seems like we're there again. You know, now you need to add technology and digital, but it's still in that sort of
In-between space.
in-between
Yeah,
space.
it is. It is. It definitely is. And yet, if you look at how much communication there is in the built environment, right, you'd think that it would be a major profession by now, but it's not. It's not. It's still quite specialist, and I think fairly small. And I think part of that is because, Amar and I were talking about that on the way over, but part of that is there's not as many buildings or public spaces being built as there are products or books or websites, you know. So I think just sort of by the very nature of it, there are less opportunities for people to create this sort of placemaking idea. However, when you design something that is at that intersection, it's probably going to be there for between 10 and 25 years, right? So you've got to do it in a very, very well-designed way, because otherwise that mistake is going to live for a very long time.
But there is a whole lot more information that we all have access to in all sorts of different ways.
Yes.
So how to incorporate that becomes
More important.
More important.
Absolutely, yeah. And some of that is driven by standards, like the accessibility. Leeds is another one that's really played quite a big influence on the way that designers in this area are thinking about what they do. Because there's a lot that they can bring back into a building through the communication aspect.